All right, everybody. Welcome to another Sandpile. Can I just get a confirmation from folks that I can be heard? Thanks, James. Thanks. All right. Thanks for coming out today. I'll get right to the news here. And I think I'll start with the BC Academy updates. This week, we're going to release, hang on. Sorry, I had my monitor computer turned on. This week, on BC Academy, we're releasing a site search enhancement by Scott Scheffler. And it's a bit of a workaround for a Business Catalyst bug that shows liquid in search results. So liquid markup is showing up in search results. And he's used a bit of a workaround. I actually installed this same enhancement in the latest e-commerce template, and it works pretty well. So watch for that to be released. Should be tomorrow, I believe. And then on the BC App Store, we have updates to the SEO and the companion integrations app from BC. You can go to the App Store and look at those. Scott Reynolds has done an update to the amazing Form Builder app, and it now provides multi-column support. And I actually use that app again in that e-commerce template, and it works real slick. So if you have to deal with forms at all and you're using the Foundation framework, it's a wonderful tool. And we're getting real close to launching the automatic backups from Backup BC. Really looking forward to that product. It's going to make it super easy to back up your client sites. And on the BC Guru side, we have the My Workwear and the Cause templates now have the visual content finder integrated into those templates for those that like to use that tool. And this week's tutorial is going to be learn how to create an automatic discount code widget. And that is actually also included in that new e-commerce template. But there's going to be a tutorial showing you how it works and how to use it. And obviously how to install it. So you don't have to get the template to get it, but it's if you happen to get the template when it's released, it's already part of that. And then just let me share my screen here and we'll do... Yeah, thanks, Steve. That form builder is pretty awesome for sure. And then finally, from Business Catalyst itself, we have the R229 system update, and that is going into place tomorrow. The thing that I was particularly interested in was it fixes a bug causing frequent logouts from the admin console. I work in a number of sites, and sometimes if I'm working on the BC Growers templates, I'm working on a US, an Australian, and a European version all at the same time. And man, it feels like it's 50 times a day I'm having to relog into some of these sites. So I'm really looking forward to having that particular bug fixed up. And they're fixing another bug for product recommendations. I don't know much about that, but I'm glad they're looking at making sure that stuff works correctly. And they've added support for this module product recommendations in email campaigns, which could be pretty cool. We'll have a look at that. And if appropriate, we'll either have a tutorial or even a Sandpile on that. And they're introducing some new mailing list APIs. And again, I haven't dug into that too much, but to be able to have more API access is always good. And the community comes forth and almost always builds something that uses it. So that's cool. They fixed DNS record validation rules. So the underscore character is now allowed. Haven't run into that myself, but I know some folks that have. And other stability and maintenance tasks. Your results may vary. And Jack asked, is that automated email being sent out from the BC App Store when an update has been made to an app? I don't think I received one yet. I don't know, Jack. The fellow I need to ask is not available right now, so I will have to... what's the best way? I don't know, Jack. I can come back to the next Sandpile. If you want to send me an email at daveh@chicagodigital.com, I will ask the fellow I need to ask and then reply back to you there. All right. Thanks, Jack. Okay. All right. So that is all that stuff. Today, we wanted to talk about getting an HTML template ready for use on Business Catalyst. So the scenario is you go to ThemeForest, or someone custom builds you an HTML template, or you just find one that you like, and you want to get that working in Business Catalyst and integrated using the web apps and the menus and all the rest of that. So I hashed out a list here of the things I go through. Like when I build the BC Gurus templates, I obviously start out with an HTML version. And even if we custom build a client site at Chicago Digital, we start out with a straight HTML version, and then convert it into Business Catalyst ease, if you like, or the Business Catalyst layout. If I don't know how else to say it there, but so I've kind of hashed out this list of the things that we go through, and I'm hoping that it'll generate some conversation, and maybe between all of us we can add to what we know, or maybe adjust what we know to perhaps a better process. So the first thing I like to do is make sure the HTML is clean and remove any unneeded files. It's hard to remember to do that, but it's particularly if you're getting this from like a ThemeForest or from a template provider. Often there's files in there that you don't necessarily need, or layouts that you don't necessarily need, and it's always better to start out with as clean a layout as possible, or with your code and your files and folders as clean as possible. Even down to sample images. If you know you're not going to be using any of the images that come along with the template, you might want to either move the ones that are provided, or make a note of them so that you can delete them later, so you're not stuffing up your site with sample demo images. And again, if you have any questions along the way or feedback, just pop them in. I've got the Q&A in the chat open on the side here, and as we go through it, I'm hoping we can all figure out a better way here. So after that, I always start by creating a new either US, EU, or AU version, whichever data center I'm working from. And if you're starting with an HTML template, it's usually best to start with brand new. It's tempting sometimes to use one of the existing sample templates that they already have, or maybe another one of your sites. But I typically find myself that if you're not careful, you wind up with a bunch of things that you don't need. So I like to start with a brand new clean site, so that all that's on there is that under construction sign in the middle of the site. Does anybody else start differently than that? Doesn't look like it at this point. So the next thing I do is make sure that Liquid is turned on in beta features. Now, I've had hit or miss where, depending on where I create the site or how I create the site, sometimes it's already turned on, but quite often it's not. And then I'll go and push something up and wonder why my Liquid code is not rendering properly or whatever. I always find in my checklist, I just go and turn the beta features on right away. I happen to turn on the new WYSIWYG editor, and I happen to turn on named modules. So I don't have to use an ID code for a module web app. I can use the name of the web app in it. And again, if you do something different, just throw it off in the questions or in the chat. At that point, I think it's convenient just to add any apps you're going to be using. Like if you use the Solid Sky company data or the menu system, or if you're going to use the form builder or foundation builder, I think it's good to just install those apps right out of the gate before you start building anything. And then at that point, I create any new categories I'm going to need that I know of that I'm going to need, and I remove any that I'm not needed. And if you forget about that and you start adding categories for your actual site build, at some point you'll look at all those categories that come loaded by default in Business Catalyst, and you go, oh, which ones do I need? Which ones do I not need? So I find it's better just to delete all the categories right out of the gate. And then any that get added back in, I know I'm using them for the client site that I'm happen to be building. I do the same thing with forms. I remove any forms I know I'm not going to be using. If it's not an e-commerce site, I remove the quote form. I remove the purchase form, the registration form. If I know I'm not using secure zones, I remove those. I quite often remove the contact us form and build my own, just so I don't wind up with the same form ID. Generally speaking, I just remove all the forms I know I'm not going to be needing. And this is all around starting with a clean site. So at that point, I'm assuming I have my HTML template, or if I've built my HTML site, I upload that up now to the Business Catalyst site. and make sure it looks the way I expect it to in the preview. And then at that point, I decide how many page templates I'm going to need. Less is usually better than more. So I don't bother with a template for the home page. Just because it's the homepage and it's not going to be replicated. But inside, I try and get by with as few page templates as possible. If I can, it's ultimately best if I just have one inner template. Sometimes you can't help it depending on the layout of the design that you're having to use. But I find the less page templates you have, the better off you are. Does anybody find that different? Let's see what Eugene says. Yeah, that's a good question, Eugene. Does anybody have a CSS tool that they use for cleaning up their final CSS? I know there's some out there that will check your output versus your styles.css and help you remove unused CSS and kind of shrink down that file size. So if anybody has a tool there, just drop it in the Q&A or in the chat. So I'm interested in this page template thing. Does anybody find that they use more page templates and they find that helpful, or are they like me and they just try and use the smallest number of page templates as possible? Yeah, James, I don't use a page template for home. I just use index.html, and there is no particular page template for home. At least for the sites I'm building. Generally speaking, the content that's on the homepage is not something that the customer edits. Normally, there's a hero of some sort. There's a section there for marketing and links. There's a section for blog output. Maybe there's a photo grid, but there's not often content that a customer is going to regularly edit. And if there is, I throw that into a content holder and let them edit it that way. That's the way I choose to do it. Yeah, a few templates as possible. Everyone seems to be in general agreement with that. Good, I'm on the right track there. So at that point, if you have one, it's easy, but if you have more than one, you need to decide which page template is your default one. And at this point, I'm talking about you have a series of HTML pages. So you have a home page, you probably have an about page, you have several HTML only pages. And you kind of got to decide, well, which one is most representative of what I'm going to use for my default page template. And then out of that, you want to remove the dynamic content, or the content that's going to change page to page. And you keep the header with the menu, you keep the footer, you keep the sidebar, those kind of things. And that's ultimately what winds up in your default page template. And any of that dynamic content gets replaced with this module page content tag. So then when you apply that template, anything that's put on the actual page shows up where that module tag is. So James says not applying a homepage template. Wouldn't that still leave it open for them to touch it and break it in the pages module? And I guess they use a template because they can lock the layout up. I guess potentially. Again, the sites that I build, the clients are generally speaking not touching any content on the homepage. If they are, we either put it in a page module, which is we use in conjunction with page control, or it's put in a content holder and we train our customers to edit it there and keep their fingers out of the index.html. But certainly, in theory, you're correct. It could leave them open to breaking something. Okay, so we've got our default page template. We've got our home page. Now at this point, we have to parse out the HTML from the page template into the BC components. So we have a head tag, which includes your calls for your CSS, includes your call for jQuery if you're loading that in the head. It includes those kinds of things, your favicon and all the rest of it. So you kind of have to decide, well, what's going to go in there? Now, the one thing I discovered last week was if you don't include your style sheet, when I say parse it out, I put this stuff into a head.inc, into an include file, and that's what I put back into the page template. But as we discovered last week, if you put your style sheet in using that method, when you're using the WYSIWYG editor, your CSS is not applied to what the customer sees. Whereas if you put the call to your style sheet just in a regular head tag without it being in an include or a content holder, when your client's in the WYSIWYG editor, they're actually seeing more of what the page looks like. So you kind of have to decide which way you're going to go there. I prefer to extrapolate that stuff out so it's away from where the client can get into it. But I can certainly see the value of keeping your CSS style sheet out of that include file and making it so that the WYSIWYG editor shows up more appropriately what the page is going to look like. In the header, generally speaking, that's where we're putting the logo, we're putting the navigation, the main navigation, any utility navigation that might be there. So I'm throwing that into an include file as well. You got to think about the menus. Do you make them dynamic or static? And then what about personalization? So I'm kind of, I guess I'm not 50-50. I'm kind of about 80-20 on this. I really try and make them dynamic. But sometimes when clients like these mega menus, or if they want the left to show up different than the right, or they got some custom stuff going with a couple of menu items, I find I have to just make them static and put them in an include file, and they have to be edited manually. But I try wherever possible to make them dynamic. And sometimes that means fussing a bit with the classes or the IDs in the dynamic menu structure. But my preference is to make them dynamic so that the client can go there and change the links if they want to, or change the wording of the menu item if they want to. Generally speaking, what are folks finding there? Sorry, James, I'm just reading your comment that you find it getting harder with a lot of templates from developers are using Webpack and Grunt. Yeah. And they send out the minified files and then the dev files. Yeah. It is getting harder and harder, depending, to get a clean HTML framework or template that you can start with, for sure. Yeah, just more work. I've danced around a bit. I've tried a little bit of the Grunt and the Sass and all the rest of it. And in the end, we have a kind of a minimized and customized foundation framework that we use. And that's what we start all of our projects from. So all of the developers start with the same thing. We all understand it. We know how to customize it, how to modify it. And that seems to work best. I've tried to take that and throw Sass at that. So I can parse out the sections that make sense, like the grid and some of the helper files for margins and padding that we use. And in the end, I actually found it kind of frustrating to know which Sass file what I needed to change was in. And maybe just it's a matter of just getting more used to working with it. But I found it simpler just to have everything in one styles.css. I knew where it was. I can roll it up in Dreamweaver. I can, what do they call that? Where you click the arrow and it contracts everything, and I can find what I'm after real quick. So that's my preference. Steve asks, he's often having to update clients' older sites, and they have BC email on yearly plans. It's not practical to start with a new site, so I end up building a site within a folder and then switching out the files. It's laborious. Yes, it is. Do I have a process for this? Yes, I do, Steve. In the end, I've got some links, and one of them is actually, it's called replacing your partner site. And it's basically the exact same process, whether it's a partner site or it's an existing site that you have to replace. So in effect, you build your new site on another domain, and when it's ready, it walks you through the process of then taking that new site and overlaying the existing site. And it's definitely a pain. It's about 4 to 6 hours, I find, to get that done. But I have a link to a tutorial series that does that. And there's certainly some tools now on the App Store, particularly Scott Reynolds' tools. There's a web app transfer and the form transfer tools help make that process easier anyway. It's still 4 to 6 hours, but it does help make it easier. Yeah, Mary says she's using Dreamweaver Fluid Grid Layout to make their own responsive template. Much simpler code and only 2 CSS files, for sure. I think maybe that's fairly common for a development shop to have their own frameworks or their own templates, and that's what they're using. And you still have to get it into BC. So I guess it's easier when you know it and understand it intimately. So yeah, head inc, header inc, footer.inc. I throw those in include files. You can put them in content holders or include files. I generally speaking try and extrapolate that away from a client's perspective. If we're doing some work for another agency, well then they definitely know how to get in and edit that. But I try and put them in includes to just get that a step away from where a client can get in there and do something. And then if we feel they need to edit it, well, then I either use content holders or we use a variation of page control in the web app to allow them to do that in a safer manner. And then, of course, sidebars if those are needed. And sidebars is one of the things that'll drive another template. So you might have a full width template and then a template with a sidebar, and maybe that's for the blog, or maybe that's for a my account section if you choose to have it that way. But generally speaking, you should be able to get by with 2 to 3 page templates for most cases. So after that, you set the default page template. And again, I'm assuming you've updated an HTML template that you bought from somewhere or you've built from somewhere. So you have like a home page and about page and maybe a services page. You have a blog layout. You have all these HTML pages that you've uploaded. So now we've got a default page template, which includes a head, a header, a footer, a sidebar if it's appropriate, and then we've got that module page content where the page specific content is going to go. So we'll set that as the default. And then for all these pages, we need to go through, update the page titles. We need to apply the page template. We need to reset the page URL because, as you know, when we upload this stuff from through FTP, Business Catalyst assigns .html to the end, and most of us like to use the nicer URLs. And remove the template URL, leaving just the page content. So when you got an about page and you're applying the default page template to it, once you do that, well, then of course you need to remove the head and the header and the footer from the about page because that's all contained within the page template. Well, that's a bit laborious, and you got to go do that for all the pages that you're going to be using on the site. Yeah, answer my phone. I don't want to, Eugene. It's I thought it was actually you calling. You know, I almost never get calls on the gosh darn thing, so I forget to turn it off and mute it. So I apologize for my phone ringing. So at that point, you should have all your page templates set up, and you should have all your pages set up, and they are referenced by a page template. So largely, a lot of your site should be there. So at that point, I'm going to create any needed secure zones and secure the pages. So if I'm going to have a my account area, or if I'm going to have a place where customers can go look at their orders or those kinds of things, then I set up a secure zone, and then I apply the secure zone to whatever pages they need to be applied to. Then the next thing I'm going to do is build out and test the login process. So we like to use Scott Scheffler built a real decent login process that basically doesn't care if you're on the regular site, on the World Secure site, doesn't matter which side you're logging in from, and it does it through Ajax. So I usually apply that. If I'm going to do it, I usually apply that. And if you want to see how that works, you can actually go to the last 3 BC Gurus templates because we've included it in those templates. So when you click on login, you get a nice modal comes up. You log in, you get a bit of an Ajax spinner, and boom, you're logged in. Pretty nice process, but it's at this point that I'll build and test that out. And then carrying on, we now need to decide what content will be in web apps, and if you're going to use something like page control and page modules, which we've talked about before. So as you're laying out your HTML pages, you're going to have some content where it makes sense to make it dynamic, make it customer editable, and you need to perhaps pull that into a web app and then put it back out under the page. So this can be real simple, or it can be real laborious, depending on the type of template or framework that you've purchased. We find in general, if you can put it in a web app, that's usually a better experience for your customer to edit. Of course, we find we make a lot of use of this page control and page module setup. So in page control, you would reference an about page, and you can define what the banner is that goes at the top of the page and through a data source to these page modules, I can say, oh, I want this icon bar, I want this photo grid, I want this newsletter sign up. And your customers can apply that at a page level. So you build the module, you put it in that page module's web app, and then your end customer can just choose from a drop-down which module he wants to apply to any given page. We find it just works really well and keeps them from sticking their fingers in, as James said, sticking their finger in where they probably shouldn't be. Cool. So James says, "Ooh, nice. I'll be checking that out." Yeah, that is a super cool login, and it takes. You might have to watch the BC Academy video to really catch the nuances, but it basically throws a hidden div at the bottom of the page, does a bit of an AJAX call, looks for a result on that hidden page, and then based on that finishes the login. And it's just super slick, and it's been working really good for us for a number of months now. So definitely worth checking out. So I'm curious here. Now, we've talked a few times about this page control and page modules. Generally speaking, are people gravitating that direction? Are they understanding it? Or am I just talking about stuff and you're going, not for us? I'm just interested to know. And again, in some of the last BC Growers templates, we've included this page control in there. And Mike has done a tutorial there showing how it's used. Yeah, Phil, it's using web apps. Basically, we're building a page control web app and a page module web app, which is a data source for fields in the page control. And then we have some code on the individual page templates that have a look in that web app and say, hey, do I have a page called About Us? Oh, I do. Okay. What is the banner image that you want on there? What is the title, the page title that you want to go in that banner image? And then what page modules do you want? I'm trying to think if I can show you one. If we have time after, I'll show you. But it really is just down to web apps. But it's a neat process the way we've got it set up. And I've done as many as 8 or 9. Certainly, we kind of leave around six custom fields in the page control where you can reference a page module. And it just allows you, let me see if I can. So when I go to this About page, this is the section that's on the actual About page, this 2-paragraph section. This photo grid is actually part of a web app, this page module web app. This Our Team is part of a page module web app. This icon bar is part of a page module web app. This question bar, it's all part of this page control. And since I'm in it this far, helps if I go there. So I have page modules and page control. And you'll see page modules. I can't wait for them to fix this. I'm so tired of logging in. So I've got a contact icon banner. I've got a newsletter banner. I've got a newsletter sign up. I've got a stats list. And the newsletter sign up is really code I built initially in HTML and then dropped into this module. So it's not necessarily something that a client would be wanting to. You'd be wanting a client to go in and edit. So that's a form with a background image and all the rest of it. But what they can do is go to page control. They can go to the About page, and they can say, oh, this is the banner I want. And of course, I've referenced the size for them. Here's the title, About the Travel Gurus. So when I get to sorry, I got that visual content finder and I'll turn that off. So here it says about the travel gurus, and that's defined here, about the travel gurus. So my client can come here, change that if I want about the only. So if I say that, so real easy for a client to change that. Turn that back because that's the master template. And then we have this page module 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you see page module 1 is a stats list. 2 is the contact travel guru today. 3 is this travel guru value statements. And that's the stuff down here. That's here's your value statements. Here's your newsletter sign up. So that's, and it's really just, these are data sourced to this page modules. And it just allows a customer to come to the about page and choose the page modules that they want to put on here. So hopefully that makes sense. So let me look at the notes here. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it's pretty similar to what you're doing, Phil. We just happen to call it something specific. So it works super. And whatever method you want to use, this is a way to keep this content in a nice, easy way for your client to pick. I mean, what could be easier than to pick from a list here? And if they get it wrong, they can either choose please select and remove it again. If they want to move things, if they wanted to move this newsletter sign up one, they just change this one to newsletter sign up and change this one to travel guru value statements. Real easy for them to work. This can get longer. This can get more convoluted, and we certainly have done that. But at its simplest, like we've got some that have page title and then a subtitle. Say you have about travel gurus, and then you want a little subtext below that. We've certainly done that. I don't know if this guy has it or not. Yeah, as for instance here. So it can get as complex as you want, but it's a pretty slick way of going about it. So you have to decide, am I going to just put this in web apps, or am I going to go a bit further and put it in something like this page control and page modules? We've got it down pretty pat, so it might take me half an hour to an hour now at the most to get this set up so that it's functioning on a client site. It took me a little bit longer to when I first started doing it to figure it out, but it's definitely been well worth it. So then you got to decide how you'll handle content that is full width versus contained within rows and columns. So what I mean by that, and I don't think this template does it, but some of the designs I get will put you see how this image is full width, and then this template is contained within a row, which is whatever the standard foundation row is. But I've had designs where some of it is contained like that, then the very next thing is full width, and then the one below is contained within the row again. This one is relatively nicely contained, but you kind of have to decide, and it makes a difference in where your module _ page content is going to go. So the trade-off is, if they want to be able to throw that full width stuff in there, in your page template, you can't constrain the results to a row and column, because if they then want something full width in there, they can't break out of the row. So then in their content, they wind up having to put a row and a column in, which then has them in the HTML. So sometimes you can't avoid it, but for the most part, we really just try and make it so what's in the page is just paragraphs and headings, and try and keep their fingers out of this whole row column business. But sometimes you can't do it. So you'd have to give them some real explicit instructions on how to overcome that. And the trade-off is between simplicity for you versus simplicity for the end user. So then at that point, I create a mailing list if we're using it. And I do that before I do any form work, because if there's a mailing list and you want someone to be able to subscribe from the mailing list, well, it obviously has to exist before you can add it to the form. And then I create any BC forms. That's the same reason I do these secure zones, because if I'm going to add subscribing to a secure zone to a form, well, then I want that secure zone to be there. And then I create any BC forms based on the template and the client need. and I update the form code on the pages. So generally speaking, if you've got an HTML template, or even if you wrote one by hand, you might have some HTML that's already written for you, but you have to take the BC versions of those inputs and labels and stuff and make them work with your form and the action URLs and any anti-spam techniques that you're using. And now, of course, we have that form builder app that Scott Reynolds has built, which is pretty darn fabulous. So this is just the order that I go in. I generally speaking build a form in HTML, get it looking the way I want it to look, and then I build the form in Business Catalyst and pull in the action URL, pull in the validation code and all the rest of that stuff. But I find it easier to sometimes I just go to the foundation docs page and copy some of their code out, and that gives me a nice layout that I can then get 2 wide or 1 wide or whatever I might want, and then go back and make it work with BC. And then at that point, you're going to create blogs, create the blog, and then add any blog posts that you're using. This is one of the, you have to really understand blogs to get this working the way you want it to. I've stumbled a couple times, and I think I understand blog modules maybe better than some, and I still trip myself up every once in a while. But the whole overall post list and post, and how you get that content, the content that you want to show. If you click on categories, how do you get it to tell the user that you're looking at certain categories? So if I go to this, I think we call it destinations in this case. And if I want to see showing articles tagged as backpacking, you think that'd be super easy, but it's not necessarily. And so you will get some of these, I guess what I'm trying to say is we get some of these wild layouts from HTML template stores like Theme Forest and all the rest of it. And they're really meant for perhaps other platforms that are maybe a little easier to get the output that you're looking for. And boy, it can be a bit of a challenge to get your layout working within the blog modules. Definitely worth it if you can get it looking the way you want. You can see this is a masonry, and this particular one was not easy to get to work properly. Even something as simple as throwing an author name on there and linking to an author without them having to be an admin on the site. That was a bit of work. So I end up using tags, and then there's some code on the blog module that looks to see whether they're an author or not, and then excludes them from these tags. But we got it down to where if there's a person in the author web app with the name of Lauren Holly, and this blog post is tagged as Lauren Holiday, then she shows up as the author, and we can get through to view a profile and view some of their posts, and we made some interactions that way. Now that felt just a little bit like showing off, but the point is, I don't underestimate how long it takes to get a blog and blog posts laid out the way you want them. You get a nice HTML template where the blog looks great, and it can be a bit of work to get your template code to work within Business Catalyst the way that you want. Yeah, thanks, Phil. And then the same thing with the store. You got to set up the store and update the store modules to work with the HTML template pages. And boy, that list layout, table output, I've played with pulling the e-commerce code into collections and using Liquid to output it, and taking control of the pagination and all the rest of it. And then I've gone the other way where I let it output it in a list format with ULs and LIs, and tried to work with that. And boy, I find them equally as challenging. So I wish it was a bit easier. I just finished up actually with this upcoming BC Guru's e-commerce template, and that one is using the list layout. And it was a bit of work to get it to perform the way that we wanted it to perform for what we would consider a modern template. But I've done the other thing where I pulled everything into collections, and run into some trouble with that too. One site I worked on has a couple thousand products, and it can be a lot to manage when you're basically pulling that into some collection and trying to deal with it that way. So that's a bit of work, and that's the bulk of it. So that's what we go through in getting either an HTML template that we coded or that's been purchased, and I've done both certainly, and getting it BCized or getting it integrated into BC. So at its simplest, it's just, I find it just piecing out the head, piecing out the header, the navigation, piecing out the footer, deciding what content's going to be in a web app, getting your forms built, and all the rest of that. And just chunking it out, having a process, chunking it out, and then getting it done. So there are some resources here, and I don't know what the best way is to get this to you guys. I don't think this is going to fly. Let me just try. I did. So there's all the links there. And I'll just kind of go through them real quick. So this is a bit of an older one, but Chad did a video on creating a BC template from scratch, which you might find useful. Deborah, we had her do selecting a template framework. So that talks more about, do I use Foundation? Do I use Bootstrap? Do I buy a template from somewhere? It talks a bit more about that. This is the one for, and I'm sorry, I'm not, who was that? That was Steve. So Steve, this is the one about replacing your partner website template. And if you're a BC Gurus member, this will go through basically all those steps. So getting ready, consolidating the files, applying the page templates, set up the menus, set up the web apps, set up the forms, set up the store, and then fixing the little things. And there is over almost 2 hours worth of content here. And basically I'm taking, I don't know if I can show you here or not. Let's see if I can get to it here. Yeah, so I'm trying to find it here. I took a brand new, what I did is I took a brand new partner website. I created just a test user ID, if you will. And I signed up as if I was going to be a brand new partner. And I took the agency website that comes with that. And then I applied a BC Gurus template to it. And this is the process I went through to update that partner template, because you can't point it anywhere else. You have to forklift it basically and replace it in place. And this goes the same if you have a site that you don't want to move. Maybe they've got a grandfathered plan. Maybe they got other emails. Maybe they got their CRM and they don't want to move it. This is exactly the same process. So you basically get it the way you want it somewhere else, and then step by step you swap out the existing template. So that's the one there, Steve. Joe Watkins also did a great series there on integrating any template into BC. And again, I hate to keep referencing BC Gurus, but you know what? That's what I know, and that's where I'm finding this stuff. So that's, I think, the last link there. And he did a integrate any HTML template into BC, part 1, part 2, and part 3. So he did a great 3-part series that talks through all these steps that we did basically there, that we talked about up top there. Really great series. I learned a lot from it myself a few years back. Integrating e-commerce. That's also a handy one. Joe did that one as well. So that's getting e-commerce integrated into Business Catalyst. So basically how to set up a store so it makes sense. And there's a part 1 and a part 2 there and a part 3 there. So some good resources there for you guys if this is what you need to do. The ones I'd focus on probably are mine, where it's replacing your partner website, and then Joe's integrating any template into BC, part 1, part 2, and part 3. All super. And I think, and if I'm not mistaken, let me just sign out here. No, it is premium. Oh, sorry. I thought this one was not a paid member requirement there. Think about that. I'm going to talk to the product manager there and see if we can maybe make that change and make that make that a free thingy. Anyway, that's the bulk of it. Those some great resources there for taking any template basically and bringing it into BC. Does anybody have any questions or experience? So Phil asked, do we use any CDNs for the site asset files, or do we just use the file storage on the site? Generally speaking, we're using the file storage on the site. From a template perspective, we've been burned before by CDNs changing or not working or getting updated, and then something doesn't work on the template. So we tend to use the captive resources, and that way we can be assured that things will work consistently. Now, for some sites I build for Chicago Digital, we do use CDNs. So James says, what's the issue with updating your partner website? There's no issue other than, it's tempting if you have a partner website and it's James at jamesrt.com. That's your partner website. Now you want to change the template out for that. It would be real tempting to build a whole other site and then just repoint the DNS to the new site, but you can't do that with your partner website. You can't change the DNS pointing on your partner website. It has to stay where it is. And so the only way to change the template out is to forklift it and install over top, if you will. Jack, I just finished it. I went, I finished it Friday, and Kristen did the Q&A on it over the weekend. I went back and fixed just a few things that needed to be fixed on Monday and handed it back to her. So I don't know exactly when it's going to be out, but it should be shortly. And hopefully this week, but I don't know for sure. But it is, once she gets it loaded on the BC Guru site and gets the marketing material and the release notes and everything done, I'm sure it'll either go out late this week or next week. How do I go about BCifying menus? So I think we all kind of started with that liquid example from Business Catalyst. I don't know if I have. I basically get the menu looking the way I want it. So you can see here, this is a site I happen to be working on. And here's the menu here. So I get the menu looking the way I want it with straight HTML like that. And then we have some layout files, some TPL files that we use. And this is all based on that same file that I think you're probably using. And we find a way, depending on what the site specific need is, we get our layout file to output this code basically. Now in this case, I'm probably going to be just fine, but sometimes they want a mega menu. Sometimes they want one item to show up as different than the others. So you got to maybe play with some of the classes and stuff. And then for social media and such, we have a single level where we know for sure it's only going to be one level. So say it's social media icons or something like that, or maybe footer menus. Then we have a single level TPL file as well. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks, Steve. And James, did I answer your question? I hope I did. Not the last bit, but you wouldn't do that 99% of the time, as you lose the CRM history anyways. No, you shouldn't lose this. If you're making the change on the existing site, you shouldn't lose the CRM history. The only way you'd lose that is if you actually deleted people from the CRM. So if you change the page templates and the pages and stuff out on your partner site or even an existing site, That's the way you keep all that CRM information. Not during this time, Steve. Probably your best to submit a trouble ticket on that. It might filter through to me anyway. Maybe because it's you, if you want to reach out to me, daveh at chicagodigital.com. I'll see if I can connect with you sometime tomorrow and work through that with you. Now I've given that out to everybody. It's generally speaking just best if you go through a trouble ticket process, only because I mean I get time off every once in a while. In fact, I'm going away next week for a few days. And if you need something resolved, we have other people that can look at it. So it's just best if you go through the trouble ticket process. But just because I know it's lonely up there in Scotland, Steve, I'll see if I can help you out. And I know it's an 18-hour flight for you to come smack me in the head for that. So. We looked for that, James, and we haven't been able to find it so far to force this all panelists and attendees. So I've been poking around in that Zoom and trying to find some stuff like that. I just haven't been able to find it. So. If anybody else has some experience with Zoom and finds that, I'd be happy to have a look there. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be anything there. Now it might be when I'm logged into Zoom and this is the Zoom app. If I'm logged into my Zoom account on zoom.com, but we've looked there too. Both Mike and I have had a look, and we just can't seem to find anything that would force that. So how many anybody out there that's actually buying an HTML template from a site like ThemeForest or Envato or any of those other type sites? Is anybody actually actively doing that? And then you've done it before, yeah? Okay. So some of you doing it all the time, not in a while. How hard, Leslie? How hard do you find it to get that into BC working in a way that makes sense for your clients? Is it hours and hours? Is it just a few hours? Maybe kind of an order of magnitude. Yeah, exactly. I mean, some of that is like asking how long is a string, but a few hours is not bad to get a template that's been nicely designed and thought out. A lot of those templates can be really well done, and a few hours invested into getting it to work with Business Catalyst is sometimes not too bad. Ah, okay. Yeah, Leslie, we've been trying to move away from that a bit, and it's interesting some of the feedback we get. Some of the community wants that boxy style, I guess is what I would say. Certainly, there's some that don't, but there's a lot that do. If we get too wild, we we get issues. Yeah, not too wild. Yeah. Even these last few that we've been putting out here, this audio play and Travel Guru and gadgets and gear, and something as simple as this full thing and the scroll button and this wow movement on the page. and this footer that reveals itself and such. And it can generate some calls for sure. This off canvas menu generated some calls. I happen to like it, but not everybody does. But that's why we make different websites. That's a good idea, Phil. So you're using your own CDN basically for some of the back office connections, if you will. So if you make an update, it goes across all your sites. That's a cool way to go. Jack says, "Can I read the questions?" As you don't know what I'm answering. I apologize for that. Jack, are there any that I gave you an answer for that you need me to get the question for, or you're okay now? You'd have to give me the answer so I can go back and find the question. But so Phil's talking about setting up his own CDNs. He says it only costs about 45 cents a month for 5 different templates, site assets. So if you can condense it into a CDN, that's a great delivery method. And then if you have to make a change, you make the change on the CDN, and boom, everybody gets it. So what kind of things do you find you're able to put in there, Phil? Some JavaScript and some CSS. Cool. Yeah, we find some, we have something called extras JS that we use. This is probably something we could do that way. So we load Modernizer, we use JavaScript cookie, we have our own little custom drop-down menu thing that we use. Smooth scroll we use every site. These are things that we have available on basically every site. So yeah, it would kind of make sense to throw that out with a CDN. Match height we use a lot. Even the slick slider. Do you find is that the kind of thing you're talking about, Phil? And do you find if Ken Wheeler decided to release 1.7, are you able to successfully change it on the CDN and not have any site issues? Thanks, Joe. See you later. Oh, even your framework file. So you would take your. So we have a custom grid here that we use. So you would take the bulk of this and throw it in a CDN. Huh. That's an interesting concept. You'd have to be a little careful, like I say, because I think you could probably break a site if you weren't careful with what you changed there. But I can sure see the advantages of that. I'll have to give that some thought. Thanks, Phil. Steve C asks, is there a way to see the other attendees in the chat? Interested to see who's here. I don't know if you can do that or not. Just going to stop. Let's see if I can do it here. So I'm showing. I'm looking at my monitor. You can't see it. So sorry. I can see the attendees, but you can't. Sorry about that. I've got it overlaid right over top of the document with all the links, and I'm looking at my monitor screen, and you can't see it. So. Okay, thanks, Barbara. I'll look at that link after the fact here. Okay, so Phil says for the CDN, my concern was if you do an update and it breaks something, but there's a whole versioning thing there, so you could roll it back if you needed to if something was broken. So that's cool. All right. Well, we're right at the 5 o'clock time. So if there's nothing else, I appreciate your attendance as always, and I look forward to chatting with you. I'm going to be away next week, but Mike's going to be here, and I believe he has a special guest to help him out with talking about. If I'm not mistaken. I think you're talking about meta tags next week. So that should be pretty interesting with Mike and a special guest. So I look forward to watching that recording, and I'll see you the week after that. Thanks.